The BPJ kid was somebody who is a male, but at a very young age started to do these cross-sex hormones and so on. But you just mentioned something that doesn't come out in the coverage of BPJ, which is that there's been an allegation that he repeatedly has been saying to the girls on his teams, you can suck my D. I'm going to take my D and shove it in your pee. And like really vile, disgusting stuff, which is sexual harassment.
It absolutely is. And I mean, it's a question. When you talk to Adelea, she's not playing sports anymore. They're in the same high school. They would be on the same team. She's been excluded from her own locker room and her own athletic team because there's one, not equal opportunity, not fair play, and he's taken a spot on the team. And then would you go back into that situation? No one would.
Oh, no. I wouldn't let my daughter do it either. I'd be afraid.
No, absolutely. And I think when we're thinking about the legal question here, the question is, can states draw legislative classifications, and what's the standard that they should be based on when they're reviewed? Certainly states can recognize that, generally speaking, there are advantages that biological males have that just exist. And so essentially what was being argued today is that we have to create individualized exceptions, first of all, which would mean, I don't even know how a state would pass a law if every time you needed to make an individualized exception. And then second, on the assumption that sort of the science doesn't support it, and the record's just clear that the science does. Even puberty
so let's just set that up clearly for the audience. They were saying, okay, there are these laws. Title IX is allowed to discriminate on sex, and the Equal Protection Clause doesn't ban it. It's been in place for decades. It does differentiate based on sex between boys and girls, but that's been accepted. To do it in this fashion, and especially based on sports, that's been made perfectly clear, is totally fine and A-OK. And so these plaintiffs couldn't get up there and say Title IX and the Equal Protection Clause have to go because they're discriminatory against our clients. They said, one of the arguments was we deserve exceptions because our clients don't have male advantage. One, because they lowered their testosterone, and one, because they did this drug regimen. And the justices were like, so we have to make an exception just for your clients, or for all clients who don't have male advantage? And how are we going to figure that out as a group? And the impossibility of it, Kristen, became pretty clear to me. And then we got to the point where the one lawyer in BPJ's case was like, well, I think, back on the sex question, you shouldn't define biological sex in determining any of this, because even if you were to go with the biological sex definitions that we could all recognize, there's going to be the XY chromosome kid who's got a limp wrist. He actually said that. He was talking about how some boys have limp wrists and started arguing about we should factor that stuff in figuring out who's going to get an exception and who's not.
It's completely unadministratable, but I think that also just the underlying truth of what was being debated, in just the sense that boys are treated the same under this law. Girls are treated the same under this law. And the idea that somehow boys who identify as girls need a special exception, what about the many others out there? As you said, maybe shorter. I'm short. What about those who have a disability? What about those who are just on medication and that might impact their performance? Are we doing exceptions for all of those individuals? The fact is, the ACLU today made the case that they do believe in sex-based athletics. They do believe that there are differences. They agreed to that. And they don't want to get rid of those differences. They just want boys who identify as girls to be able to come into the girls category. Mm-hmm. And we need to ensure that that doesn't happen, because women deserve equal opportunities, fairness, and privacy.
They actually got up there and tried to spin us that boys who are on puberty blockers may actually be at a disadvantage.
I heard that.
It was crazy. It was not even puberty blockers. It was, I think this was about a post-pubescent male who then lowers his testosterone, like the first plaintiff in Hickox. That person's at a disadvantage versus biological girls. And here's how that was spun by attorney Kathleen Hartnett, SOT 11.
I do think that's the most prudent, but definitely on a record that's more developed, because I think in the end of the day, it might end up being a surprise to, we don't know yet. But I think we have some good evidence that actually at the end of the day, being a transgender woman, actually to the extent there are, and you've repressed your testosterone, you're at somewhat of a disadvantage in many ways because you have, again, this larger frame with weaker muscles and no testosterone.
Okay. By the way, it's not no testosterone. That's a lie, too. They just get their testosterone levels down to something closer to what a female would have, but they still have all the advantage of male puberty and male bone length and strength and heart and lung capacity and all the rest of it.
You mean like Will, who goes by Leah Thomas? Is that what you're talking about there?
Exactly. That's a great example because people can see it with their own eyes. Like, that's a post-pubescent male who tried to pawn himself off as female, and puberty blockers or whatever, testosterone, pills to lower it or not, you can see with your own eyes he's got an advantage over the females.
Well, the science tells us that there are denser bones, longer bones, that all of these physical advantages don't go away with puberty blockers. Again, the science confirms that even after puberty blockers, there are inherent physical advantages that boys have that girls simply don't, and they never will. And again, I think it underscores and also, I just want to say this, why would we create an incentive for children to go on puberty blockers, particularly when the court has already just said in Skermetti that, hey, this is a medical experiment and we're, have some concerns about that and the states should be working these things out right now. So I think there's just a lot of implications to that argument. But the science is clear. And again, so are the rights of the states to be able to draft reasonable legislative classifications that are based on sex. And really what's being done here is an argument to say, we don't really mean sex, we mean gender identity. And we know that that essentially erases women.
Yes, exactly right. And so, unfortunately for us, though, we're stuck with Bostock, which was a Supreme Court case deciding that under Title VII, which governs employment, gender identity is a protected class, and you cannot refuse to hire somebody based on their gender identity, which is just really crazy. I mean, it's crazy. Just the other day, Kristen, we played a tape that a young girl at a Planet Fitness out in California took of an allegedly trans person, a guy pretending to be a girl, in the women's locker room at Planet Fitness in California. Not to get too graphic, but clearly he was pleasuring himself in the women's bathroom stall. And you could see it, not based on, you couldn't see him exactly, but you could see the shadow down below. And this clever girl took a video of the shadow, which clearly showed what he was doing. And you and I both know that the vast majority of these male to female alleged trans people are autogynephiles who are actually not gender confused. They're getting off in a sexual fantasy in which they get turned on by dressing like women and being around women while they do it. And nonetheless, we had to be subjected to, the court talking about these people like they're, in Bostock, like they're just like you or me, or they're just like somebody who's like a black person who has an immutable characteristic that's, skin color, or a woman who's got an immutable characteristic that's, her lady parts. And they actually gave them the protection of the law saying you have to hire these people. So if this guy who is pleasuring himself in the Planet Fitness comes into my company and he wants me to hire him, and I know that he's probably an autogynephile, I can't say no because of Bostock. Thanks, Neil Gorsuch. He wrote the opinion. And so we have to deal with that finding. But they excluded bathrooms and locker rooms. And now today the question is, are sports also excluded from that? And I think it's going to go the right way. But can you just give me what did you make of Gorsuch today? Because I was alarmed by him.
Well, Bostock is a decision that we've essentially been litigating around since it came out. We believe it's a wrongly decided decision and a poorly reasoned decision. And I've had Justice Gorsuch rule in some of the cases that I've argued and write the opinions, and he's done a fabulous job. But Bostock is not one of them. And I think his comments today were concerning in the sense of talking about whether we should essentially equate those who identify as the opposite sex to some sort of special class status under the law that would be akin to race. But, we don't know the reasons he was asking those questions. So it might have been that he was trying to get to a place to resolve the case in a more straightforward way. But let me say this. I mean, just as we've been litigating these cases for 10 years, and that issue of, whether the states must essentially protect women, we have an oral argument in that in 2 days. So, we're covering the landscape. we are continuing to work on that.
At the lower court, right? At a lower court.
Well, at the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, so it's not too much lower. I mean, these are on their way up right now, so it won't be long.
How is that looking? Because, like, I was so discouraged that Gorsuch did not seem like he's going to rule in our favor on that one. Kavanaugh seemed like he wasn't going to rule in our favor on that one. And we can lose one, but we can't lose two.
I think we don't know when the issue is actually presented, and it underscores the importance of the American people. It underscores the importance of who we elect in terms of the legislators that are passing laws and the legislative history that they put in place. I would not give up on that argument. I think that there's a reason even the Department of Justice today in the argument said, you know, we're not going to take a position on that on equal protection, and we actually believe Title IX protects girls in these instances. And when it comes to Justice Gorsuch, again, I think there are easy ways to distinguish Bostock. That was about whether in a hiring and firing situation, and you had to take account of sex in that instance, that sex was like what it turned on, whether that qualified under the statute as sex discrimination. In this context where we're truly talking about gender identity, the hinge point is not sex. A boy who identifies as a girl is treated the same as a boy who identifies as a boy. That's not sex discrimination. And states have the right to make distinctions on the basis of our biological differences. So we're going to keep going, and I think eventually we're going to win. And if we don't, I worry about Western civilization, just candidly. I mean, I think that's how important this issue is, that we can talk about what we know to be true in human biology.
Honestly, I just have to reiterate, I'm so grateful to you. It's one thing to sit in the anchor chair and get outraged at these stories, and there is a role for bringing attention to them in the media. So I'm not completely discounting the press in this, but and usually they've been a force for evil. But it takes someone like you to get off the couch, get up early, file the briefs, go through the litigations, which are just painstaking and tedious, and the interrogatories and the depositions and the motions to dismiss and the motions for summary judgment, and then the motions for appeal, and then the appellate briefs back and forth, and then the oral arguments, and then appeal up to the next level. And then it's like, it's so much work. And I know it because I used to do it for a living, and I'm so grateful to you for doing it over and over and over to make sure these things come out right. And it's on all cultural issues, but this one is the one of our time, Kristen. I can't imagine how, when you go back and you talk to the girls, like the girls in this case, what was their reaction? How are they feeling?
They're excited. They're relieved that the argument came. But I mean, I'll tell you, as we're getting ready yesterday, you know, there's some emotion involved about being, you know, having your face all over, and what does it mean in terms of the hate that you get, and yet they're strong and they're courageous, and I believe they've unleashed warriors by taking this battle on. MK and Maddie, they're passionate about this issue. They receive scholarships under Title IX, scholarships that, you know, if they hadn't received them, they might not have been able to go to school. And Lainey is the same. And then we've also been able to partner with Attorneys General Labrador and McCuskey in West Virginia and Idaho, and they have stood strong in this from the very beginning as we've represented the states alongside them. So there are bright lights in this, but it takes endurance and grit. And just as you said, it takes the media, it takes your voice. That's what's helping us turn this corner. It's ordinary Americans, and it's Americans who have a platform saying, we're going to stand for truth. We're contending for our girls.
A new year means new financial goals, like making sure your savings are secure and diversified. Will this be the year you decide to talk to someone from Birch Gold Group? They use an educational approach with a deep understanding of macroeconomics. There are forces pushing the dollar lower and gold higher, which is why they believe every American should own physical gold. So until January 30th, if you're a first-time gold buyer, Birch Gold is offering a rebate of up to $10,000 on qualifying purchases. To claim eligibility and start the process, you just text MK to the number 989898. Birch Gold can help you roll an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold, and you are still eligible for a rebate of up to $10,000. Consider making right now your first time to buy gold and take advantage of a rebate up to $10,000 when you buy before January 30th. Text MK to the number 989898. Claim your eligibility today. Again, text MK to 989898. 9898. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.